What is the true price of geopolitical illusion when an empire refuses to acknowledge its own mortality? By the end of the summer of 1237 BC, a heavy, dry dust blankets the trade routes of the Levant. Why does a colossal superpower, capable of fielding thousands of elite war chariots in mere days, watch the maneuvers of infantry ranks from the east with mounting horror? Herein lies the brutal anomaly of the Bronze Age. The Hittite lords forge formidable weapons from the costliest metals, yet their diplomatic blades shatter against the cold logic of those they have spent centuries dismissing as barbarians. The vast Hittite Empire is stretched to its logistical breaking point. From the shores of the Aegean to the dusty Syrian plains, ancient borders groan under the relentless pressure of external threats and covert internal sabotage. At the very center of this gargantuan but lumbering construct stands Hattusa, a stone labyrinth, a fortress city. Great King Tudhaliya IV reigns from the frigid depths of his impenetrable palace. Basalt lions stand guard impassively at the massive gates, but monolithic stone cannot save the sovereign from the paranoia eating him alive. Ambitious usurpers lurk in the cool shadows of massive palace columns. According to historians, the royal court during this period was thoroughly saturated with the poison of mutual suspicion. Every quiet whisper from the high priest sounds like a prelude to a coup d'état. Every clay tablet bearing reports from the northern frontiers is read as a harbinger of imminent rebellion. The Hittite state is slowly devouring itself. The sovereign wastes critical time on complex purification rituals, seeking salvation in mysticism. He desperately pleads for protection from the storm gods, while real, tangible death is methodically forged from bronze in the east. Far beyond the banks of the Euphrates, an entirely different power is rising. The Assyrian king, Tukulti-Ninurta I, holds no sacred awe for the old hegemons. He does not believe in shaky compromises. He believes in iron discipline, calculated logistics, and the marching step. The Assyrian ruler is a cold, mathematically precise, and extremely dangerous strategist. If Hatti represents a sluggish giant, frozen by the traditions of a heavy-armed aristocracy, then Assur is a predator of an entirely new breed. The heavy, archaic diplomacy of the Hittites suddenly and violently collides with the aggressive expansion of a machine state. Realizing the direct threat of military conflict, Hattusa makes a preemptive move. Tudhaliya decides to strangle his opponent without drawing swords, an economic blockade. Hittite envoys rush to the rulers of the buffer kingdom of Amurru. In Syrian chambers, a harsh treaty is signed, intended to be a death sentence for Assyria's ambitions. The cuneiform text dictates an uncompromising ultimatum. No Levantine merchant has the right to conduct business with the people of Assur. Not a single wagon loaded with copper shall cross the eastern borders. Copper is the lifeblood of Bronze Age geopolitics. To sever this artery is to paralyze the enemy's forges. Without fresh supplies of metal, it is impossible to cast new spearheads or repair damaged armor. As the clay tablets of Assur state, this massive diplomatic strike was cold-bloodedly calculated to isolate the young king and trigger the collapse of his army. But the plan, perfect on parchment, fails catastrophically upon its collision with reality. Assyria does not suffocate. The strategic embargo is a crushing failure. Assur's military industry stays ahead of the curve, relying on internal reserves and captured stockpiles. Instead of sending submissive envoys with pleas to lift the blockade, Tukulti-Ninurta I orders full combat readiness. Hittite scouts, risking their lives, cross no man's land and bring back terrifying, meticulously detailed reports to the capital. They record ceaseless movement in the east, the thunder of thousands of hooves and the dull roar of marching columns kicking up heavy clouds of suffocating dust. In the rocky gorges near the borders of the kingdom of Nihriya, Assyrian vanguards appear. They do not act like random looters. They operate like engineers of war. Silently and methodically, they seize strategic heights, rapidly erect fortified camps, and take firm control of fresh water sources. A Hittite sentry lies on the scorching rocks of a border pass, trying to steady the treacherous trembling in his hands. Below, in the dry valley, he sees not a chaotic mob of nomads, but the perfectly straight, geometrically precise ranks of a new, heavy infantry. The bronze scales of their armor catch the merciless light of the blazing sun in synchronization with every coordinated step. There is no unnecessary noise, only the rhythmic, oppressive sound of metal methodically rubbing against stiff leather. At that moment, the nameless soldier physically feels the coming catastrophe, realizing that the archaic world of his ancestors is doomed. Hattusa's blind faith in the power of old treaties only accelerated the gears of a monstrous machine of destruction. The bronze of foreign spears and the relentless marching step are tightening into a noose around the throat of ancient trade routes. While this death grip on the trade routes tightens, scribes in the throne room of Hattusa feverishly prepare orders. Tudhaliya IV stares at a clay map of the world. He demands soldiers for the inevitable war. Dozens of messengers leave the capital on fresh horses. Heavy wagons bearing the royal seal cross sun-scorched valleys. Messengers swap exhausted mounts at dusty post stations. Time is working against the empire. Every lost day brings catastrophe closer. The order is bone-chillingly strict. Every vassal is obligated to provide war chariots, and every city must field infantry. The great king invokes old oaths of fealty. But oaths on fired clay are rapidly losing their weight. On the coast of the warm sea lies wealthy Ugarit, a city of merchants and pragmatists. The king of Ugarit holds a heavy message from the Hittite capital, demanding the immediate dispatch of elite units to the east. The ruler sets the tablet aside. His fingers are stained with wet clay. He wipes his hands on expensive linen and looks at his merchant ships in the harbor, inspecting warehouses filled with choice grain. He knows the absolute futility of the coming campaign. By the end of the 7th month of 1237 BC, fear grips the Levantine courts. The Hittite Empire demands the blood of its allies, while the new Assyrian power promises to grind anyone who disagrees into dust. The vassals find themselves squeezed between two armies. The era of the Great Subversion begins. Yesterday's loyal servants suddenly forget their oaths. They hide soldiers in distant garrisons and bribe inspectors from the capital. Corruption eats away at army reserves faster than moisture destroys old blades. A diplomatic thriller unfolds in the stifling palace chambers. The ruler of Ugarit gives the messenger from Hattusa glowing promises, swearing by all the gods to send his best crews. The messenger departs. The king immediately summons his generals. The real order is entirely different. Stall for time at any cost. Cite a shortage of thoroughbred horses. Complain about a poor harvest. The words of the ruler of Ugarit from the archival tablets read, "My chariots are broken, and my horses have fallen to pestilence." The vassal buys his way out with gold, sending the Hittites heavy ingots instead of living soldiers. But gold cannot hold a line, and gold will not stop the onslaught of Assyrian infantry. The Babylonian kingdom prayed for a balance of power, but didn't send a single chariot, proving a harsh truth.
Metal always weighed more than oaths on clay. Hypocrisy becomes the primary weapon of the merchant states.
By day, the rulers offer public prayers for Tudhaliya IV's victory. By night, their merchants secretly cross the eastern borders to conduct direct deals with the enemy. Caravans with copper bypass Hittite outposts via remote trails. Pack-laden donkeys head straight into the Assyrian camps. Betrayal has a clear financial equivalent. Traders sell scarce metal to those who will forge it into swords for their own executioners tomorrow. According to chroniclers, a quiet panic grips the coast. Cruel rumors outpace the movement of troops. Merchants bring terrifying news from the east, describing total annihilation. Assyrian units take no prisoners. They methodically slaughter resisting garrisons to the last man and burn flourishing settlements. Scouts return to Syrian cities with their throats slit, their bodies found at border markers. This is a clear message from the Assyrian commanders. Assur is not coming to negotiate. Assur is coming to kill. This rational horror paralyzes the will of Hati's allies. Syrian rulers lock themselves within their fortresses, dictating endless letters to scribes. The texts are overflowing with false excuses. Disease has decimated the draft animals. Mercenaries demand double pay in silver. City walls are crumbling after the winter. Every tablet sent buys a few days' reprieve. Every lie becomes a death sentence for Hittite hegemony. Tudhaliya IV reads these reports in his cold palace. He clearly sees the covert sabotage of his subordinates, but the colossal empire is too lumbering for swift, punitive measures. The center is inevitably losing control over the fringes. The Hittite army assembles with agonizing slowness. Scribes make errors in mobilization lists. Weapon depots turn out to be half-empty. Quartermasters steal grain. Commanders argue fiercely over flour supplies. Aristocrats bicker over the right to command the right flank. Hati's war machine is mired in a bureaucratic swamp. By the beginning of autumn 1237 BC, the situation becomes irreversible. Rumors are replaced by intelligence briefings. Assyrian advance units seize mountain passes. This is no longer a threat. It is a full-scale invasion. A Hittite liaison officer in Ugarit stands on a stone pier. He watches grain being loaded onto Phoenician ships and hears the clinking of coins in the port. The local king's soldiers calmly drink cheap wine. No one is sharpening bronze swords. No one is preparing wagons. The officer grits his teeth in helplessness. He understands the terrible truth. They have been betrayed. The vast army of Hatti has been left completely alone. The cold calculation of cowardly allies proved more accurate than military forecasts. Hattusa desperately awaits reinforcements. The capital demands soldiers, but the western roads are empty. The vassals bought their own safety at the cost of their suzerain's demise. They made a cynical bet on the new hegemon long before the first spear was thrust. Hattusa's sluggishness breeds monstrous consequences. While Hittite diplomats try to force the Levant to fulfill its military obligations, time slips away forever. The enemy does not negotiate. The enemy maneuvers aggressively. And while old alliance treaties are feverishly hidden in Syrian palaces, fresh bronze cools in the forges of Assur, ready to redraw the borders of the ancient world forever. While fresh bronze cools in stone-casting molds, the capital of Assyria turns into a single, non-stop mechanism. Assur exhales heat. Smelting furnaces run 24/7, and the air is thick with acrid soot. Fire sears the lungs of slaves and overseers.
This is no longer the traditional seasonal gathering of a tribal militia. This is brutal, continuous industrial weapon production. The ancient city on the Tigris River is becoming a massive arena of total militarization. Blacksmiths here do not forge unique blades for celebrated heroes.
They stamp out identical, geometrically flawless spearheads. Thousands of uniform blades drop into wooden crates. Hundreds of heavy shields are covered in thick oxhide. The standardization of army equipment ruthlessly erases traditional individuality, but it gives birth to an invincible system. Assyrian quartermasters keep strict records with icy composure, methodically issuing bronze armor plates to every recruit and checking the thickness of every fastening strap. Everything is strictly calculated. Every minor detail serves only one purpose. In the deep shadows of high mud brick walls, Hittite spies watch the proceedings with mounting horror. They hide in the motley crowd of foreign camp followers, recording what they see on hidden wax tablets with trembling hands. It is not the number of people in the streets that frightens them. They are paralyzed by the absolute, inhuman order. An entirely new force trains on wide, packed earth parade grounds. The heavy Assyrian infantry. Soldiers stand shoulder to shoulder in a maximum density formation, rank after strict rank. There is no chaotic shouting, no individual battle rage, only the dry, barking sound of officer commands. Step, a short halt. A sharp spear thrust. Another step. A synchronized swing of a short sword. This is a mechanical, mathematically precise force, locked tight in rigid discipline. Experienced spies quickly realize the terrifying truth. This is not just an army before them. It is a ruthless, perfectly tuned machine of suppression. By the beginning of the 10th month of 1237 BC, the young king's logistical triumph reaches its peak. Tudhaliya I didn't just gather huge masses of armed men. He provided them with everything necessary for a long, autonomous march through hostile territory. Tens of thousands of sturdy wagons are loaded with choice grain. Huge stockpiles of dried meat are prepared. Countless leather waterskins are filled to the brim with river water. The military apparatus of rising Assur consumes gargantuan resources, but the supply system works without a single glitch. The departure of the army's vanguard resembles the slow slide of an avalanche. A heavy mass of trained men and sharpened metal moves in sync. As the infantry columns exit the wide city gates, gray dust rises to the heavens. The dry earth visibly trembles under the impact of thousands of leather sandals. This is not just a military march to distant borders. It is an overt demonstration of the overwhelming technological superiority of an entirely new era. On the other end of the fractured Middle Eastern world, within the walls of Hattusa, the response looks like a desperate, painful convulsion. The belated and chaotic mobilization of forces exposes all the hidden vices of the aging empire. The ancient aristocratic tradition of warfare demands exceptional luxury. For centuries, the Hittite military elite has been accustomed to fighting only on heavy war chariots, an incredibly powerful but extremely demanding weapon. In the capital's arsenals, royal servants hurriedly assemble heavy wooden platforms. Experienced craftsmen desperately try to straighten warped six-spoked wheel rims. Sweating grooms do their best to subdue overfed war horses that have grown restless in their stalls. Preparing a single chariot crew consumes a massive amount of precious time. In those same hours, an Assyrian sergeant manages to fully arm and form up his entire squad. Noble Hittite lords leisurely don their luxurious scale armor, carefully draping thick caparisons over their expensive mounts. They argue loudly and spitefully with one another over positions of honor on the right flank.
Their wounded pride does not allow them to submit to general rules. Every aristocrat sincerely considers himself the sole architect of the coming victory. At this very same time, a nameless Assyrian infantryman simply marches forward. He doesn't need personal servants or elite mounts from the royal stables. He has a spear, a broad shield, and an officer's order. At the end of late autumn 1237 BC, two fundamentally different military doctrines begin their fatal convergence. The difference in marching speed proves catastrophic. While the lumbering Hittite generals are only just trying to align their cumbersome supply trains, the vanguard of Ashur's army is already aggressively devouring the distance. Hatti's heavy chariots bog down in the treacherous mud of narrow mountain passes. Thoroughbred horses break legs on sharp rocks. Massive axles snap with a dry crack under the excessive weight of supplies. Infuriated aristocrats lash frightened servants with whips. Chaos firmly takes hold in the ranks of the doomed empire. The vulnerable mechanism of a chariot-based army requires ideal conditions: wide, flat plains and firm ground. The disciplined Assyrian infantry despises the weather. Rigid ranks of soldiers march through dust storms and cold nights, cold-bloodedly fording swift mountain rivers. They move forward with the relentless, frightening stability of clockwork. Every synchronized movement brings closer the very collision the old world so desperately tried to avoid. Hittite intelligence brings terrifying figures regarding the distances covered by the enemy to Tudhaliya IV's palace. The speed of the enemy's advance ruthlessly shatters all strategic calculations. The ring around vital routes is closing. The great king suddenly realizes the terrible, irreparable price of his sluggishness. Elite martial valor always looks flawless on the ceremonial frescoes of ancient palaces, but in real war, it inevitably and brutally breaks against the cold mathematics of a properly deployed infantry formation. The mathematics of this formation dictates entirely different rules for maneuvering on the stony plateaus. While Hittite generals desperately try to impose a classic war of position on the enemy, the landscape turns into an arena of brutal logistical attrition. Tudhaliya IV pulls his elite units toward narrow mountain passes. Hittite strategists think in terms of old maps, certain that Ashur's army will take the shortest, most predictable route. Wooden battle platforms crowd the gorges, blocking the approaches to the Euphrates. The aristocrats prepare for a head-on collision, waiting for the Assyrian infantry to break against the monolithic shield of their fortified positions. But Tudhaliya I has no intention of playing by the old empire's rules. The Assyrian war machine simply bypasses the established blockades. In total secrecy, under the cover of the cold autumn nights of 1237 BC, Ashur's forward ranks veer off the beaten trade routes. They vanish into the lifeless, hostile barrens. Logistics becomes the primary, most lethal weapon of this campaign. Assyrian engineers achieve the impossible, organizing a rapid crossing of the turbulent Euphrates, where Hittite scouts considered it physically impossible. Hundreds of inflated bull hides are lashed together. Wooden decking spans the improvised pontoons. Thousands of heavily armed soldiers cross the river in absolute, chilling silence. No panic, no lost supply trains. The brutal rhythm of the march never falters for a second. Caught off guard, the small Hatti garrisons vanish one by one. The Assyrians waste no time on long sieges. They methodically dismantle border fortresses with fast, focused strikes. Bronze delivers fatal blows before the sentries can even light their signal fires. Tudhaliya's scribes dispassionately record captured grain and wagons, while the infantry columns press on relentlessly. Word of these lightning-fast purges reaches the main Hittite army in fragments of terrifying rumors. Shock seizes the Hittite corps commanders as they realize the catastrophic speed of the enemy's advance.
distances that require weeks of grueling marches for the Hatti army, the Assyrians cover in mere days. The terrain itself becomes actively hostile to the lumbering Hittite forces. The stony plateaus around Nihriya are unforgiving. Maintaining a single heavy Hittite chariot requires a massive baggage train, spare axles, forage for high-bred horses, and dozens of servants. Supply lines stretched for miles begin to snap, broken beyond repair. Movement becomes agony. A Hittite driver kneels in the dry dust, his hands raw and bloody from the coarse ropes. Before him lies a spent warhorse, heaving with heavy, rattling breaths. Nearby, a chariot wheel lies snapped in half after hitting a boulder hidden in the muck. The unit commander rides past indifferently, not even turning his head. He knows that to stop is to fall behind forever. Abandoned crews are left to the mercy of the elements. The Empire's pride isn't breaking under spear thrusts, but under the weight of its own archaic design. By the end of autumn, 1237 BC, Hittite logistics are in their death throes. Attempts to seize the initiative end in total failure. Maneuvering massive columns of men and horses across broken terrain results in an administrative collapse. Orders arrive catastrophically late. Units lose one another in the thick fog of the cold morning hours. Support troops drop from exhaustion, unable to haul supplies of bronze arrows and rations behind the rapidly receding vanguard. Meanwhile, the Assyrian infantry closes the pincer. They aren't just outrunning Tudhaliya IV's army, they are deliberately herding the enemy into the most disadvantageous sector. They seize the high ground. They unilaterally dictate the direction of the march. The Assyrian king's cold logistical calculation becomes a tool of total psychological destruction. Exhausted by continuous marches, the Hittite soldiers begin to realize they are walking straight into a trap. Every new dawn brings only a growing certainty of their own doom. They no longer control the situation. They obediently go wherever the enemy's mathematically precise will drives them. But the true, soul-crushing blow isn't dealt to the rearguard stragglers. Assur's forward scouts execute one final, critical maneuver before the general engagement. They slip silently through the dusty haze and reach key points around Nihriya. While the Hittite army uses its last strength to drag its broken chariots over scorched stones, the Assyrian infantry methodically and cold-bloodedly cuts them off from the only source of life. They establish total control over the fresh water sources. Control over the fresh water sources turns the stony wastes into a death trap. Around Nihriya, Assur's forward units dig in for a hard defense. They seize the rare mountain springs. They dam the beds of drying seasonal creeks. They throw up earthworks around every well. The logistical calculus of Tukulti-Ninurta's commanders is simple and uncompromising. A warrior can survive a week without new bronze for his shield, but a warrior cannot hold the line for 3 days without water. After long weeks of grueling maneuvers, the massive Hatti army hits this invisible wall. The sun mercilessly bakes the stony earth. Dry yellow dust chokes the air, hanging constantly over the massive camp. It cakes the soldiers' inflamed eyes and grinds between their teeth with every heavy breath. The colossal mass of men and pack animals consumes an incredible amount of moisture. Supplies in heavy waterskins vanish at a terrifying rate. The filthy water at the bottom of the barrels heats up quickly. Thirst becomes the first and most fearsome enemy of the Hittite generals. The heavy war horses are the first to suffer. High-bred stallions from the royal stables wheeze in the suffocating heat, their flanks heaving heavily and their hooves striking the scorched earth nervously. Without ample water, the Empire's primary strike force becomes useless dead weight. Hittite quartermasters are forced to slash rations. Support infantry now receive only a few gulps of warm, murky sludge once a day. High-born aristocrats still drink clean wine from their personal stores, but even that fragile resource is rapidly drying up. Tension in the claustrophobic stone sacks ratchets up. The mountains squeeze the Hittite army from all sides, leaving no room for wide maneuvers. Every morning, Hittite commanders hurl assault teams into breakout attempts, desperately trying to shove the Assyrian infantry away from the springs. Short, brutal skirmishes erupt in narrow stone corridors. The famous Hittite chariots sit completely motionless. The massive battle platforms are utterly useless among the sharp crags and deep fissures. Hatti's elite warriors dismount, launching head-on infantry assaults along narrow, jagged trails. There, they inevitably slam into the monolithic line of Assyrian shield-bearers. Bronze clangs against bronze with a dull thud. The stony soil of Nihriya quickly becomes a slippery trap. The Assyrian spear thrusts are precise. Assur's infantry doesn't give an inch. They silently and cold-bloodedly hold the line. The price of every cup of water is now measured in mangled bodies. Night brings no long-awaited relief. The thick darkness becomes an arena for a large-scale intelligence war. Assyrian saboteurs slip between the cold stones like silent shadows, penetrating deep behind the Hittite picket lines. A ruthless, methodical hunt for tongues begins. A young Hittite sentry lies on the edge of a deep precipice. The icy night wind carries the sharp scent of enemy campfires. His throat burns with unbearable dryness. His cracked lips bleed. His filthy fingers convulsively grip the shaft of an old spear. A sudden soft rustle of shifting pebbles sounds behind him. A sharp, professional blow to the back of the head. Darkness. The body is dragged silently into the enemy camp. These daring abductions happen every night. Assyrian intelligence officers methodically interrogate the captives. They know no mercy, employing horrific physical coercion to extract precise information about meager grain supplies. They learn the secret signals of the sentries and record the catastrophic state of enemy morale. But the king of Assur goes far beyond primitive interrogations. He calculatedly turns the extracted words into weapons of mass psychological destruction. The Assyrians intentionally release some of the broken captives. Beaten and driven mad by the horror they've endured, these men return to their dying campfires. They carry carefully planned disinformation into Tudhaliya IV's camp, and this informational poison spreads instantly. Returned soldiers whisper terrifying things in the dark. They tell of tens of thousands of fresh warriors arriving continuously from the east. They speak of a brewing betrayal by Syrian mercenaries. They swear by all the gods that Assyrian gold has already bought the loyalty of their own commanders. By the end of autumn, 1237 BC, these poisonous lies have seeped into the deepest layers of the Hittite military machine. Internal correspondence records an unprecedented spike in paranoia. Flank commanders openly distrust orders from the center. Every night, officers expect a treacherous stab in the back from their neighbors in the camp. The unified command of a massive body of armed, embittered, and thirst-crazed men begins to irreversibly disintegrate. The sudden blow comes from within. A group of desperate mercenaries tries to storm the royal water wagons by force. A brief nighttime massacre erupts among their own ranks. Tudhaliya IV attempts to restore control through the sword, ordering the immediate execution of the ringleaders and anyone spreading rumors. The royal executioners work until dawn, but the fear of the invisible Assyrian threat proves far stronger than the fear of their own ruler. The enemy's dry logistical calculation yields a hundredfold result. Physical suffering has completely annihilated discipline. The
The cold mathematics of a foreign will dictates new rules of survival. Tudhaliya I deliberately delays the order for the general assault. He calmly watches as the enemy methodically destroys itself. He simply waits for the moment when the critical internal pressure finally snaps the spine of the Hittite army. And this cruel calculation works flawlessly. Cut off from water, choking on dust and total paranoia, the giant camp of the ancient empire begins to rapidly devour itself. The camp of the giant empire devours itself. Internal decay accelerates with every grueling hour, turning what was once a great army into a huddle of people driven mad by despair. In the first days of early winter, 1237 BC, the last meager supplies of fresh water finally turn into a thick, foul-smelling sludge at the very bottom of parched water skins. Discipline collapses. Mobilized infantrymen from the deep Anatolian provinces cast aside their heavy wooden shields. They no longer believe in victory. They vanish into the night shadows of deep gorges by the dozens. By morning, the count of deserters inevitably reaches the hundreds. Royal punitive squads can no longer physically stem this spontaneous flood of fugitives. The threat of imminent execution pales before the maddening thirst and animal fear of an invisible, inevitable enemy. Officers try to restore order with brutal lashings, but the exhausted soldiers simply do not react to the pain. An anonymous Hittite spearman sits on the scorched stones in the shadow of a broken battle platform. His swollen tongue is stuck fast to his dry palate. He stares dully at the tarnished bronze tip of his issued weapon. He has no desire to die for the wounded pride of a distant monarch. He wants only one gulp of murky water. Around him, on the dry earth, lie equally exhausted warriors who have lost their human form. No more talk of martial valor. No thoughts of defending ancient borders. Only grueling physical pain and the paralyzing wait for the inevitable end. In the very center of this progressing chaos, the Hittite high elite desperately seeks salvation in mysticism. The old gods are obligated to intervene. High priests in white robes, stained with yellow dust, continuously perform complex purification rituals. The thick scent of burning, expensive incense mingles bizarrely with the nauseating stench of rotting horse carcasses. On massive, portable altars, the last healthy sheep are methodically slaughtered. With trembling, blood-stained hands, the priests extract the still warm livers of the sacrificial animals. They stare intensely at the moist surface of the internal organs, searching for favorable omens, for even the slightest hope of salvation. But the omens are absolutely catastrophic. According to the chroniclers present in the camp, the priests see only black spots and deep, unnatural deformations on the tissue. The storm gods have finally turned their backs on the rulers of Hatti. This mystical verdict breaks the unstable psyche of the aristocrats far faster than the days of physical thirst. The archaic consciousness of the elite is unable to withstand a harsh reality where their celestial patrons admit unconditional defeat before a foreign, flawlessly organized marching stride. Panic instantly spreads to the commanders of the few allied contingents. Secret diplomatic correspondence from the final days before the general battle records a total collapse of trust. Vassal rulers secretly exchange small cuneiform tablets right inside the besieged camp.
They are no longer discussing the tactics of the upcoming fight. They are nervously discussing the terms of a possible separate surrender. They are trying to mathematically calculate exactly who needs to be betrayed first to preserve their own status. It is a grim parade of insignificance in the face of imminent slaughter. On the opposite side of the stony valley, an ominous, mechanical silence reigns. The Assyrians do not hold mass hysterical prayer sessions.
They do not seek answers in sheep guts. The engineers of Ashur's army silently check the tension of leather straps on heavy shields. Decurions busily and methodically inspect the sharpness of every blade in their units. The soldiers receive measured portions of water and calmly await orders. The cold, utterly pragmatic mood of the Assyrian camp stands in sharp contrast to the chaotic, mystical fatalism of the Hittites. For Tukulti-Ninurta's soldiers, victory does not depend on the unpredictable will of ancient deities. Their triumph depends solely on the thickness of their armor, the density of their formation, and the rigid execution of their commander's orders. Thirst and deep demoralization become the perfect invisible weapons. They completely break the enemy's psyche long before the first strike of copper. By the end of 1237 BC, Tudhaliya IV's massive army has finally turned into a mob of doomed men trapped in a merciless snare. The emotional breaking point has been passed. Hittite soldiers begin to openly hate their heavy chariots, which are absolutely useless in these mountains. Commanders no longer issue orders. They merely frantically recount the remaining crews. The mountain passes are tightly blocked by foreign shields. There is no way out, no way to negotiate. And in this moment of absolute hopelessness, the doomed Hittite aristocrats begin to prepare their crews for the final strike. The doomed Hittite aristocrats begin to prepare their crews for the final strike.
The sun beats mercilessly into inflamed eyes. Yellow dust hangs in the still air, settling in a thick layer on expensive breastplates and luxurious horse plumes. In the suffocating silence of the stony plateau, only a dry, rhythmic hammering is heard. Craftsmen feverishly drive wooden wedges into the dried-out wheels of heavy battle platforms. Every movement is saturated with hollow despair. For centuries, the noble warriors of Hatti had unilaterally dictated their will to the entire Near East. Now they are driven into a dead end of stone and thirst. Their high-bred war horses wheeze heavily, utterly exhausted by the multi-day march without water. They nervously gnaw at their massive bits as thick, bloody foam slowly drips onto the scorched earth. The pride of the old empire demands decisive action. Absolute fatalism completely displaces fear. The aristocrats silently tighten the stiff leather straps on their armor and methodically check the balance of their long spears. No long speeches, no empty hopes of rescue. There is only a grim, compressed resolve. They will try to hack a path to safety through the dense ranks of the enemy, or they will inevitably perish under the broken axles of their own machines. Glints of the merciless midday sun slide across polished bronze, turning the drawn-up lines of Hittite chariots into a massive, blinding, but utterly doomed target. In the center of the besieged camp, the final act of diplomatic impotence unfolds. The sweltering royal tent is saturated with the heavy scent of fear and old oils. Tudhaliya IV flatly refuses to believe in the cold mathematics of his own defeat. He makes one last, frantic gamble on the ghost of his former global influence. The sovereign dictates an urgent message to a frightened scribe. It is an ultimatum. The great king demands the enemy immediately lift the tight siege. He orders them to clear access to the water sources. He demands they retreat beyond the banks of the Euphrates. He loudly threatens the imminent wrath of the ancient gods, bluffing desperately by mentioning non-existent fresh core of his vassals. The damp clay obediently accepts these absolutely empty words. The tablet is sealed with the massive royal signet. A lone messenger sets out across the neutral zone, carrying with him the last illusion of a peaceful outcome. The messenger quickly crosses the scorched dead zone and enters the zone of absolute Assyrian control.
There are no signs of panic here. Here, perfect order reigns. The air smells of weapon oil, horse sweat, and cooling metal. The king of Assur personally receives the message. Tudhaliya I feels not the slightest tremor before the ancient title. His face remains absolutely expressionless. As the copied texts of the diplomatic archives state, his response becomes a masterpiece of cold, mocking cynicism. He dictates a counter-letter. There are no emotional threats in it, only a harsh statement of facts. The Assyrian ruler openly mocks the other's weakness, pointing to the rotting carcasses of horses in the ravines and the Hittite mobilized infantrymen fleeing under the cover of night. The illusions are shattered. The reply letter returns to the Hittite king's tent as a final, non-appealable death sentence. Behind the forward Assyrian pickets hangs a menacing, heavy silence. This is not the silence of fear. It is the ominous silence of a bowstring drawn to its limit. An anonymous Hittite dignitary stands on his platform, staring intently through the narrow slit of his bronze helmet at the opposite slope of the wide valley. He clearly sees the perfect, terrifying geometry of the enemy's battle formations. Thousands of tower shields are drawn up in a flawless, unbroken line. The cold glint of sharpened bronze merges into a single, shimmering wall. The enemy soldiers do not shout curses or clash spears against shields. Assur's infantry stands absolutely motionless, simply waiting for the command.
The Hittite aristocrat physically feels this crushing, inexorable power. A clammy cold paralyzes his fingers as they convulsively grip the thick leather reins. At the same time, within the Assyrian command post, orders are being issued, curt and clinical. There are no inspiring speeches regarding martial glory, only cold, ruthless logistical calculation. The officers listen intently to their aggressive monarch. The directive is crystal clear. The order is one of absolute cruelty. Take no prisoners among the Hittite elite. The aristocracy of the old world no longer holds political or financial value for the new power. Their exorbitant ransoms are no longer required. Assur demands a total, paralyzing, and bloody triumph. The commanders nod in silence. A predatory, calculating confidence burns in their eyes. They understand the mechanics of the impending slaughter perfectly. They know for a fact that the heavy Hittite wooden platforms will be unable to maneuver freely on Nihriya's rocky, uneven terrain. The officers quickly return to their units, issuing harsh directives to the heavy infantry. Strike with long spears, aiming true for the horses' legs. Drag the lumbering aristocrats into the dirt with hooks. Kill methodically. Kill fast. Breaking the line to pursue individual targets is strictly forbidden. This ruthless directive severs all possible paths of retreat. A brutal fatalism pushes tens of thousands of men toward one another. The heavy war chariots form up, preparing for their suicidal head-on assault. That suicidal head-on assault begins with a deafening roar. The heavy battle platforms lunge forward in a single front. Horses, exhausted by thirst, wheeze frantically under the lash of long whips. Thick wooden wheels hammer against the uneven stone. Centuries of haughty military doctrine are staked on one blind gamble. The earth visibly trembles under thousands of hooves. Thick yellow dust instantly chokes out the sun. Aristocrats in scale armor level their spears. Their tactical calculation is hopelessly archaic. Build maximum speed, then slam a colossal mass of wood and bronze into the infantry ranks. Trample the shield bearers, shatter the formation with raw kinetic force.
But the unforgiving landscape breaks the plan before the armies even clash. The ground, scarred by deep gullies, does not forgive high speeds. Weakened animals slip on boulders. The narrow valley floor prevents a wide front from deploying. The crews are forced toward the center, huddling into dense, uncontrollable clusters. Massive axles lock together with the dry snap of splintering wood. The momentum of the impact plummets. By noon, in the year 1237 BC, the ancient superpower makes its fatal tactical blunder. The elite chariot, stripped of all maneuverability, instantly becomes a sitting duck. The wave of Hittite pride slams into the wall of Assyrian shields with a sickening metallic crash. There is no breakthrough. Assur's heavy infantry coolly absorbs the weakened blow. They step back in unison, dampening the inertia, and lock their ranks tight. There is no chaos, no duels of honor, only a ruthless mechanism of extermination. The first rank holds firm behind thick leather tower shields. The second rank delivers short, mathematically precise thrusts with long spears from behind cover. The infantrymen do not aim for the armored torsos of the nobles. They methodically strike the most vulnerable points, the legs of the war horses. Wounded animals collapse to the ground with wild, rasping groans, blocking the advance of the rear ranks. Wooden platforms flip with a crash, crushing their owners beneath them. An anonymous Hittite driver pulls desperately on the stiff reins. He is completely deafened by the roar of wood and the clatter of metal. Suffocating dust fills his nostrils. Directly ahead, he sees an impenetrable wall of enemy shields. He tries to wrench the platform to the right, but it is impossible. From the left, an out-of-control neighboring rig slams into him at high speed. From behind, his own men press forward blindly. The kill zone has finally snapped shut. A moment later, the faceted head of an enemy spear punches easily through the wooden side of his chariot. Cold bronze delivers a precise, fatal strike. The Assyrian archers begin their assembly line work. The sky darkens as thousands of arrows fall simultaneously. They strike in dense volleys, raining down on the massive cluster of chariots bogged down in the crush. The Hittite aristocrats are locked tight in a trap of their own making. Expensive armor offers no protection against the massive barrage from above. Sharpened metal ruthlessly pierces scale cuirasses. The pride of a great nation, nurtured for centuries in the halls of Hattusa, is being mowed down like common weeds on the filthy stones of Nihriya. There is no celebrated gallantry here, only dust, the stench of sweat, and the non-stop operation of the Assyrian death machine. This clash brutally exposes the doctrinal chasm between two completely different worlds. The expensive, temperamental Hittite military system proves utterly helpless against a new type of massed, fanatically disciplined infantry. The Assyrian spearmen begin to advance slowly. Step, spear thrust. Step, short sword jab. They coolly drag the surviving aristocrats to the ground, using bronze hooks on long poles. Heavy plate armor prevents the fallen from rising quickly. The grim order of Tudhaliya I is carried out with terrifying precision. No prisoners are taken today. A few hours after the general engagement began, the autumn of 1237 BC records the irreversible collapse of the old hegemony. Behind the agonizing squadrons stands the Hittite support infantry in ragged lines. These are thirst-maddened, utterly exhausted militiamen. With mounting dread, they watch as their invincible royal guard is turned into dry statistics for someone else's archives. They can clearly hear the death rattles of their commanders. The illusion of the Empire's absolute invulnerability is physically crumbling before their eyes. Blind, all-consuming panic instantly grips the rear ranks. Conscripted peasants and mercenaries drop their heavy wooden shields en masse. No one attempts to aid the dying elite. Weapons fall onto the hot stones with a useless clang. The formation disintegrates into dust far faster than the Assyrian vanguard can even reach it. The vast mass of infantry turns as one and flees blindly, powerlessly trampling their fallen comrades. The instinct for self-preservation completely wipes out the last vestiges of military discipline. The front has utterly collapsed. In an instant, the mighty Hatti war machine ceases to exist as a functioning mechanism, proving that any ancient hegemony eventually breaks under the weight of its own panicked flight. Under the weight of this mass panic, the once impregnable flanks of the Hittite army finally shatter. The Assyrian shield-bearers break through the thinned defensive lines with a low, rhythmic roar. Resistance is completely broken. Assur's infantry no longer holds a monolithic formation. Commanders issue brief orders to clear the rocky plateau. The rigid ranks instantly split into mobile, highly efficient combat pairs. They advance methodically. They hunt the fugitives. Bronze delivers precise, fatal strikes to the backs of the retreating. They coolly cut off any path to safety. The narrow valley quickly fills with thick dust, screams, and the clatter of weapons. The great, centuries invincible army of Hatti finally ceases to exist. It turns into a giant, chaotic swarm of victims. While the remnants of the shattered Hittite core desperately seek refuge among the scorching rocks, the finale of a personal catastrophe unfolds in the center of the vast camp. Here stands the luxurious royal tent. Tudhaliya IV stands motionless at the entrance.
He hears the rising, terrifying roar of defeat. He sees the guards of his personal escort fleeing. Illusions are shattered. There is no escape. The ancient gods are silent. The great king makes the single most shameful decision of his life. He casts his symbols of power onto the floor, covered in expensive carpets. He abandons the state treasury. He betrays his own bleeding army. The lord of a vast empire leaps into a light chariot. Guards roughly shove aside wounded nobles begging for help. The driver furiously lashes fresh horses, miraculously preserved in the baggage train. The chariot streaks away from the battlefield along a narrow mountain path. Tudhaliya flees. Wooden wheels bounce and rattle over sharp stones. This desperate, cowardly dash saves his physical life, but this same shameful flight forever destroys the sacred authority of the Hittite monarchy. A ruler who abandons his army to be slaughtered ceases to be a god. He becomes merely a frightened, broken man. By the end of this terrible day in 1237 BC, Assyrian forward units enter the Hittite camp unopposed. There are no defenders left. Only abandoned servants, maimed animals, and the colossal wealth of the old superpower remain. A methodical, calculated plundering begins. Assur's soldiers do not succumb to chaotic looting. Discipline remains flawless even during this grand triumph. They work according to a clear plan. They herd thousands of captives into long, dense columns. They bind hands tightly with thick leather straps. Hittite aristocrats who miraculously survived the head-on assault now sit submissively on the trampled earth. Their expensive cuirasses have been stripped away. Their faces are coated in gray dust. Their eyes are completely hollow. Heavy cedar chests from the royal treasury are smashed open with short axe blows. Heavy silver ingots hit the ground with a dull thud. Assyrian quartermasters busily inspect the surviving battle platforms. They count the thoroughbred horses, checking their lineage brands. Yesterday's fearsome weapons of the hegemon instantly become mere inventory. Assyria's logistical machine effortlessly switches from extermination mode to total inventory mode. The captured spoils are truly colossal, capable of funding new wars of conquest for decades to come. The collapse of the old world generously pays for Ashur's future wars. But the grimmest process unfolds outside the captured tents. Royal scribes step out onto the battlefield. This is bureaucratic horror in its purest form. The time for dry mathematics has arrived. The scribes hold wet lumps of clay and thin wooden styli. They walk calmly between the rows of fallen enemies. Assyrian soldiers perform their gruesome but familiar task. They methodically sever the heads of the slain commanders. They neatly stack these horrific trophies into regular, geometrically perfect pyramids. No unnecessary emotion, no wild rage, only cold, routine state accounting. In the twilight of this late autumn in 1237 BC, an anonymous Assyrian official stands impassively near one of these pyramids. He does not notice the heavy stench. He does not look into the faces of the fallen. His only concern is the perfect accuracy of his lists. He makes short, sharp strokes on the soft clay. 1, 50, 100, 200. Each pressed mark signifies the physical end of an ancient noble lineage. Each tally impassively records the death of a commander. The martial pride of a vast state is routinely converted into dry columns of figures. The victor's archives are rapidly filled with new documents. They contain not a word about heroism or valor. They are entirely devoid of compassion. They record only the pure, verifiable material outcome of the Battle of Nihriya. Thousands of living slaves, hundreds of intact chariots, tons of high-quality copper. These fired tablets become the most enduring tombstone for Hattusa's global ambitions. A centuries-old hegemony finally takes the pathetic form of an inventory list. And now, this endless catalogue of seized resources humbly awaits the appraising gaze of the ruthless victor. The appraising gaze of the ruthless victor drifts slowly across the endless rows of the defeated. The king of Assyria, Tudhaliya I, slowly walks the grey, dust-covered plains of Nihriya. His heavy leather sandals crush abandoned Hittite weapons. He treads upon land that now belongs unconditionally to him alone. He delivers no loud, boastful speeches to his exhausted soldiers. He coolly and methodically studies the spoils. The Lord of Assur stops before a crowd of thousands of bound Hittite prisoners of war. This is the former elite, the muscles of a once invincible empire. Now, they are simply a free, disposable resource for the grand construction of massive new Assyrian temples. The king issues one short, mathematically calculated order. No performative public execution. No senseless physical destruction of valuable labor. He orders the mass, horrific procedure of depriving the prisoners of light. Hundreds of hot fires are hastily lit across the rocky plateau. Bronze rods are heated to a blinding white glow. Thousands of young, physically strong men will lose their sight forever at the touch of the glowing metal. This is cold, pragmatic political calculation. A blinded man cannot take up a short sword again. He cannot organize a successful armed uprising in an isolated slave camp. He will never find the way to his childhood home across the scorched Syrian wastes. The maimed prisoners will blindly and submissively turn heavy stone millstones. They will haul colossal basalt blocks until the end of their days under the unceasing, brutal control of overseers. Blind slaves become the most reliable foundation for a new, absolute world hegemony. While the scorched air over the valley fills with the smell of burned flesh and muffled cries of despair, An invisible shockwave rattles the foundations of the most protected palaces in the entire Near East. The geopolitical shock from the catastrophic outcome of the general battle spreads faster than the swiftest courier horses. In the sweltering Nile Valley, the mighty pharaoh of Egypt listens in silence to the dry report of his forward intelligence. In distant Mesopotamia, Babylonian kings nervously reread urgent cuneiform dispatches. The neighbor's reaction proves utterly cynical. There is no sympathy for the fallen giant. Ancient strategic alliances instantly crumble into fine dust. Scribes in Thebes and Babylon frantically rewrite the texts of international agreements. They methodically and ruthlessly scrape the name of Hati's ruler from fired diplomatic tablets. Yesterday's sworn allies immediately refuse to send grain, thoroughbred horses, or scarce bronze to the losing side. The old world pragmatically and basely bows before the new, terrifying power. No one wishes to stand in the way of the flawless Assyrian infantry. Babylon and Egypt prefer to immediately begin profitable trade with the victor. They demonstrate clearly that the massive political catastrophe of one is always the ideal starting capital for the imperial ambitions of another. At the same time, on the other end of the fractured continent, the quiet, shameful finale of a personal tragedy unfolds. Tudhaliya IV returns to his mountain domain. He enters the massive stone gates of Hattusa not as a great sovereign, but slinking under the cover of falling night like a frightened, hunted fugitive. A heavy, deathly silence hangs over the capital's crooked, paved streets. Women do not cast flowers beneath the hooves of his exhausted horses. The nobility does not emerge into the wide squares to greet their monarch. The ruler has returned home with the indelible brand of a coward. By abandoning his bleeding army to be torn apart by the Assyrians, he has forever undermined the sacred authority of the supreme power. The stone lions still impassively guard the entrances to the spacious royal palace, but the empire within those thick walls is already dead. The profound loss of trust triggers an irreversible, rapid mechanism of internal collapse. Vassals openly refuse to pay the annual tribute in silver. Distant, wealthy provinces hastily prepare armed rebellions. The giant state begins to rapidly fall to pieces. A brand new, brutally harsh political reality sets in. Assyria becomes the absolutely undisputed master of the entire Near East. The long end of Hati's centuries-old era of greatness is paid for in full by the unthinkable destruction of its military elite. Total control over strategic copper routes passes forever into the iron grip of Assur. The circulatory system of the Bronze Age now feeds Assyrian weapon foundries exclusively and without interruption. The obsolete military doctrine of heavy, utterly lumbering chariots finally gives way to the ruthless mathematical efficiency of the infantry formation. Tudhaliya I has proven one harsh truth to the entire ancient world. You cannot stop a perfectly tuned mechanism of destruction with nothing but illusions and memories of past great victories. History dictates its cold, absolutely unbiased laws for the changing of eras. No past glory, no thick basalt walls or multi-day mystical rituals can save a stagnating state from a new, hungry power. The price of geopolitical blindness is always measured in thousands of broken lives and territories lost forever. The Hittite Empire flatly refused to believe in its own historical mortality. It attempted to hold on to a disintegrating old world by leaning stubbornly on its cumbersome pride, and was ruthlessly trampled by a foreign, marching step. History has absolutely no forgiveness for intellectual and tactical rigidity. An empire that relies on past merits, instead of harsh adaptation to the new realities of total war, inevitably turns to dust. Tell me, looking at the ashes of Hittite ambitions, Would you cling to obsolete traditions, hoping for a miracle? Or would you accept the brutal rules of a new age of iron and blood?